Sangye chudang soki chognam la jang chu bardu dag new kapsu chi dagi chen yen gi pe sonam ki rola penchu sangye drupa shu Sangye chudang soki chognam la jang chu bardu dag ni kapsu chi dagi chen yen gi pe sonam ki rola penchu sangye drupa shu Sangye chudang soki chognam la jang tu bardu dagni kapsuchi kagi chunyen gi pe sonam ki rola penchu sangye rupashu.
Okay, so let's just do a couple of minutes meditation on the breath, just to steady and center our mind. So again, just think what the essence of those prayers we did is. The purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. In order to do that, first I have to reach enlightenment myself, and that depends upon my completing the path to enlightenment. Therefore, I'm going to study the first lamrim text, Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, beginning with the life of Atisha. I'm doing this to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So really establish the bodhicitta motivation. Okay, thank you. So last time I was reading from Geshe Sonam Rinpoche's book on Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And, there's a reason that, he starts this with biography Atisha, and why Lama Tsongkhapa started Lamrim Chenmo with a longish biography of Atisha, and Dipamkara Rinpoche started Liberation with an even longer life of Atisha. And we have this little booklet I mentioned last week, which is a shorter life of Atisha. Well, I don't know. Morning, Henry. So this was online. Did I mention? One of the translators of this was Rahul Rinpoche. I think I talked about it, didn't I? If I don't remember, you don't remember. Rahul Rinpoche was the Lama who lived over in Marblehead or somewhere over there, and was giving teachings in the 80s on the Bodhicharya Avatara to a bunch of students. And then and Tim and Martha invited Geshe Jumper down from Milarepa Center, and yada, yada, yada. Kurukulla Center started. So we did have this online, and Rahul Rinpoche was one of the translators of this in Thailand in 1973, 74. And this little booklet was, we reprinted this in Delhi when I was running the Tushita Center back in 83, 84. And we had it online, and then he objected somehow. He wanted to publish it as a book, although there's no copyright notice in this book. And so we took it down, but unfortunately Rinpoche passed away last year. So we're trying to find where we had it online and maybe put it back. So if we find it, I'll let you know. I'm not sure which text this is translated from. His Holiness, in His Holiness's brief foreword, he says, this is a short version, abridged translation of the life and deeds of the incomparable Great Master Atisha. So I'm not quite sure where it's abridged from. So when we left Atisha and his noble band of disciples, they were fighting leviathans in the Bay of Bengal on their way to Sumatra. So I'm sure you want to know what happens. They made it. Spoiler alert. Finally, through the force of his love and compassion, he succeeded in pacifying the demonic forces which were hostile to his enterprise of seeking instruction on bodhicitta and his wish that the Buddha's teachings should spread more widely. In Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, Dipamkara Rinpoche comments on various episodes in Atisha's life, pointing out what we can learn from them. So although Atisha was naturally endowed with unusual compassion and love from early childhood and had gained extensive knowledge and insights, he was still prepared to make this dangerous journey for the sake of developing bodhicitta. This shows us the crucial importance of bodhicitta as the very heart of Mahayana practice. So, that we should really emphasize the development of love and compassion and bodhicitta in our practice. No, not just in our practice, in our lives. We learn that despite the rigors and perils they faced, those in Atisha's party maintained even the outward signs of their ordination. But nowadays, when monks have to work outside their monastery, they often change into lay clothes. Some people claim only inner spiritual maturity matters and that outward demeanor is unimportant. This attitude undermines the Buddha's teachings, whereas respect for it grows when practitioners are meticulous about their conduct. So I can relate to that, unfortunately. You know, as a monk, I was ordained in 74, and then in beginning of 77, Lama Yeshe sent me to Delhi to start a center, and you know, I was there for 6 years, and you know, being a monk in India was easy enough. There were a lot of other monks around, and people knew what a monk was. But then in '83, Lama sent me to London to take over Wisdom Publications, and in those days, you know, if you walked around in Tibetan monks' robes, people didn't know what you were. People weren't very familiar with His Holiness, and there weren't many other Tibetan monks in the West even then, or Western monks, and Western monks and nuns. And it wasn't my experience, but sometimes, yeah, other monks, when they're walking around in their robes, people would spit on them, you know, and they'd think they were Hare Krishnas. You know, Hare Krishnas had a pretty bad rap at that point. And people, and you know, you shaved head and you're wearing this kind of weird robes. People would shout out, you know, Hare Krishna. And so also to, you know, I took over from Wisdom from an English businessman who had a business in London, and he ran Wisdom out of that. So we had to find an office, and I had to open bank accounts and do all this stuff, deal with realtors. And so I bought a pin. I was in Singapore around that time. I went running around trying to raise money as well. And when I was in Singapore, I had a pinstripe suit made. So I thought that would go down pretty well in London. So, you know, I started wearing lay clothes, and it really made a difference. You know, there weren't many other monks and nuns. Rabina was there. She was a nun. You know, she was the only sangha. And then after 2 or 3 years, Venerable Sarah got ordained. So there were a couple of nuns, but there wasn't anything like a monastic community. And actually, by the time Sarah got ordained and came back, I'd disrobed already. So, you know, I found it very hard to maintain the monastic discipline in lay clothes, and, you know, people, you know, I was living in not very good conditions. It was a kind of condemned house that we got rent free. We could live in until they tore it down, and then we had to move to another squat. So they were slightly pioneering conditions. And but you know, you get up in the morning. I was just living with lay people, and then you go to the office, and then you work in the office all day. Then you come home. You know, it's like very sort of ordinary life. You know, my previous imprints from the earlier part of my life weren't very deeply buried. So so I don't know when I look back, if I'd just bitten the bullet and worn my robes all the time, it might have been different. I can't say. But I remember when, you know, Lama Yeshe started Wisdom Publications at a center we had in north of England, Manjushri Institute, which was in the 80s, it was kind of taken over by the NKT, Kelsang Gyatso, and the Shugden people. And we sort of abandoned that to the FPM, from the FPMT. But Wisdom was based there, and that was okay. But as I mentioned, the guy who was running it was in London, and Rabina really liked being in London. So when I took over we decided to develop wisdom in London. So when we were doing that, also another nun, Yeshikado, Australian nun, came over to help. She'd been working in the FPMT office in Kathmandu, I think. And so there were three of us, one monk and two nuns, trying to get this thing off the ground. But when we told Lama what we were doing, he was shaking his head and saying, "Oh, London's very bad place for monks and nuns." So Yeshikado, after a while, went back to Australia, and then what happened? And yeah, then we found another place. Anyway, Rabina survived. I didn't. As she survived as a nun, as we know, and I didn't survive as a monk. So, you know, I kind of thought, well, it's better to be a good layperson than a bad monk. And unfortunately, I turned out to be a bad layperson as well. So it's kind of no-win situation. I think, and Pabonka Rinpoche in Liberation, I can't remember exactly, he said there are three things you can't trust: a cat burglar, something else, and a monk who's disrobed. So on landing in Suvarnadvipa, or Sumatra, I think, Atisha and his followers found a number of the master's students practicing meditation near the sea. Atisha stayed with them for 14 days to discover more about the great master's life. That's Serlingpa, the bodhicitta teacher he was going to study with. Atisha found they were practicing meditation near the sea. Stayed with them 14 days to discover more. In our impatience, we would have rushed to meet Sudvanadvipi, Serlingpa, at once. Atisha's conduct reminds us to be prudent before making a commitment, since the relationship between student and spiritual teacher is of great importance and should not be undertaken lightly, nor with the haste of a dog gobbling up a piece of lung. I guess Tibetans feed their dogs lung. After getting to know Atisha and those who accompanied him, some of Serlingpa's students went to report to their master that a great scholar who was without match in the whole of India had made a 13-month sea journey with his followers to receive teaching on the hidden meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Remember, we talked explicit and implicit. The hidden meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Oh yeah, I was looking at the footnotes, wasn't I? Might skip the footnotes today because otherwise it just takes too long. And especially on the altruistic intention, bodhicitta. Sudvanadvipi was, I guess that's his Sanskrit name, Sudvanadvipi. Tibetans generally call him Serlingpa. Serlingpa. Ser means gold, Ling means place, Pa means person. So the man from the Golden Isle, Sudvanadvipi, was pleased and told them since this was an honor, they would welcome Atisha and his students formally. The master, along with many novice monks and 500 fully ordained monks in their best robes, each carrying a water pot and staff. So you see these, sometimes you see with Shakimuni Buddha with his two main Arhat disciples, Maudgalyayana and begins with S.
Sariputta.
Sariputta, thank you. we just talked about him 100 times just now in the Heart Sutra. They're carrying sort of monks' staffs. The water bowl, water pot, maybe it's just the monk's begging bowl that you'll see, you know, Buddha Shakimuni holding, what the monks still go out with on their alms rounds in Thailand, for example. They all lined up to greet him. Atisha saw this from a distance and was filled with joy, since it made him think of the great dignity with which the Buddha had traveled from place to place, accompanied by many arhats. Atisha's students also lined up to form a procession. They wore their 3 robes and each carried an iron begging bowl, a water pot, okay, so they're different, a staff and a yak's tail fan to brush away insects in accordance with the Mahasangika tradition. Begging bowls shouldn't be made of anything precious. In case you're thinking of acquiring one, these days the best iron begging bowls are available in Bombay. So that was a few years ago. I don't know. Does anyone want a monk's begging bowl? Who runs the shop at Kurukulla Center? Not open yet. It was a glorious occasion when these 2 great masters met. The beneficent forces expressed their pleasure by sending down a rain of flowers. Everyone was moved, impressed, and filled with faith. Atisha offered Solingpa a crystal vase containing gold, silver, pearls, beryl, coral, and other precious substances. It was full to the brim, which signified Atisha's hope to receive all of the master's precious teaching, as though poured completely from one vessel into another. The master led Atisha into the palace of Silver Parasol, there to establish a spiritual relationship of trust and mutual respect. Over the next days, he taught 15 times on Maitreya's Ornament of Clear Realization, which explains the hidden meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. For the next 12 years, Atisha remained with him, hearing, thinking, and meditating on teachings regarding this hidden aspect, which came from the Buddha through Maitreya and Asanga, and on teachings regarding the altruistic intention, which came from the Buddha through Manjushri and Shantideva. So we talked last time about these 2 lineages meeting in Atisha. And I think for the next 12 years, Atisha remained with him. So 12 years was the amount of time that Asanga spent meditating, trying to establish contact with Maitreya. I think we all know that story, I think. The master of the Golden Isles did not just select the most important aspects, but taught exhaustively on every point. For 12 years, their pillows touched when they slept, so close was their relationship. Finally, everything the master knew had been passed on to Atisha, who had gained the insights and realizations he sought. Then the master told Atisha that it was time to leave and predicted that he would go to a snowy land in the north. Atisha returned to India, where his main seat was Vikramashila. We talked about those 3 main monasteries last time. In Bodh Gaya, he corrected the wrong views of many, brought understanding to many whose understanding was incorrect, and through discourse and debate defeated many who disparaged the Buddha's teaching. Though he was ordained in the Mahasangika tradition of the Vaibhashika school, his outstanding scholarship, exemplary conduct, and lack of bias won him widespread respect and admiration. So he was ordained in the tradition of a Hinayana school, but since he just spent 12 years developing bodhicitta, he was clearly a Mahayana practitioner. Meanwhile, in Tibet, the teachings of early propagation of Buddhism were no longer widely disseminated, and though the later propagation had begun, there was much confusion as to how the Buddha's teachings should actually be practiced. I might look this one up. So this footnote says, the early dissemination of the Buddhist teachings began during the reign of life of King Songtsen Gampo, who died in the year 650. He founded a number of temples, including the famous Jokang in Lhasa. During his reign, a new script for the Tibetan language based on the northern form of the Indian Gupta alphabet was devised for administrative purposes and for the translation of Buddhist texts into Tibetan. Gradually, a literary language developed in which extremely faithful translations from Sanskrit were made. Under the kings Trisong Detsen and Tri Rinpoche, Buddhism took root and flourished in Tibet. The Indian masters Shanta Rakshita and Padmasambhava played important roles in this process. It is said that Atisha belonged to the same family into which Shanta Rakshita was born a few centuries earlier. In 841, King Langdama began to persecute Buddhism, and though he was soon assassinated, it was not until the time of Lama Zopa in around 986 that the later dissemination of Buddhism began in Western Tibet. So that's talking about the early propagation teachings, the ones that began with King Songtsen Gampo and really accelerated 100 years later with King Trisong Detsen, and then, Shanta Rakshita and Padmasambhava. And that's when the Nyingma school was founded, the early tradition, the ancient tradition. And then King Langdama, destroyed a lot of Buddhism, and then the later propagation began, and then we'll see Atisha was invited. There was much confusion about how to practice the Buddhist teachings. People saying, if you practice Sutra, you can't practice Tantra. If you practice Tantra, you can't practice Sutra. And there's no understanding how these Mahayana practices need to be combined. Inauthentic tantric practices were advocated as a swift means to enlightenment, while practitioners of Sutra disparaged practitioners of Tantra and vice versa. The ancestors of Lama Zopa, the king of Ngari, so that's in Western Tibet, had done much to establish and help the Buddha's teaching to flourish. However, by the time of Yeshu's reign, Buddhism in Tibet was undermined by internal conflict and unresolved doubts. So I was in Western Tibet in 95. I went to Kailash, but we went, if you're going to Kailash, there's like a northern route that takes you to west of Tibet to a town called, Tibetans called Sengi Kapo. It's also called Ali or Shinkwanghe. It's over towards Afghanistan. And then from there we went south. There's a southern route too that takes you more direct to Kailash. And if you go the northern route, then from there you go south, you go to Tsaparang and Turling, which is where this kingdom of Guge existed and where Atisha was first invited. And, there was amazing tunnels carved into the rocks, and where people would stay in the winter, and a lot of it wasn't so actively destroyed in the Cultural Revolution as all the stuff in Eastern and Central Tibet, but it was really Buddhism continued to flourish there even during the time of King Langdama, but then these corrupt practices crept in. So what happened. In view of this, the king Yeshe-ur hang on. Okay. Yeah, the king Lama Yeshe-ur. In view of this, Yeshe-ur, the king, chose 21 outstanding young men, compensated their parents, and sent them to study in India. Of these, only 2 returned. You know, it's like Tibetan monks coming to America. Not many of them go back and, like me, get overwhelmed by the environment. The rest all died. The rest all died of fever due to the unaccustomed climate and living conditions. Lochen, a great translator, Rinchen Zangpo, so the FPMT translator program is named after him, Rinchen Zangpo, and Lo Chen means great translator, Lo Chung means small translator, Ngo Legpe Sherab. The 2 who returned reported that there was no contradiction between the practice of Sutra and Tantra. They'd been advised by many great pundits that Atisha would be the best person to invite to Tibet to resolve the conflicts which had arisen. Accordingly, the king decided to send a party of 100, led by Gyatso Senge, to invite Atisha. They took with them much gold for this purpose. When they reached Vikramashila, they remained there to study, but did not succeed in bringing Atisha to Tibet. Lama Yeshe-ur now began to collect more gold to send another party to invite Atisha, but was captured by the king of Galok, who was hostile to Buddhism. The Galok king demanded that Yeshe-ur give up his faith, and when he refused, he had him thrown into a dungeon. Changchub had heard that his great uncle had been imprisoned and set out to rescue him. The king of Galok announced that he would free Lama Yeshe-ur only if he became a vassal and abandoned his plan to invite Atisha to Tibet. Otherwise, a ransom would have to be paid, Yeshe-ur's weight in gold. With much difficulty, Changchub collected a great quantity of gold, but the king refused to accept it, saying that it equaled only the weight of Yeshe-ur's body without the head. Then Changchub went to the heavy door of the dungeon and explained all that had happened to his uncle. His uncle said that it was better to die than to give up the Buddha's teachings, that he could wage war against the king, but that many would be killed in the fighting and many would take bad rebirths as a consequence. So he was resolved to find the rest of the gold. In the meantime, he advised his uncle to take courage, reflect on karma, turn to the 3 jewels for refuge, think kind-hearted thoughts, and create merit. Yeshe-ur smiled when he heard these eloquent words of advice. He said, "I thought you were a spoiled princeling, accustomed to an easy life, good food, and fine clothes. I never expected you to have such strength, and I always felt I had to stay alive till the Buddha's teaching was firmly re-established in Tibet. But now I see that I can entrust this task to you. I'm old and at most have only another 10 years to live. I've sacrificed my life many times in the past, but never for the Buddha's teachings. Don't waste the gold on trying to free me from this prison, but use it to invite Atisha to Tibet. Tell him that I've given my body and life to the king of the Galok in order to bring him to Tibet. My last wish is that he should come here to benefit living beings and the teachings. Ask him to bless me and pray that I may meet him in a future life. Now do what you must and can." Changchub was deeply moved by his uncle's conviction and resolve. And though he could hardly bear to leave, he went from the prison determined to carry out his uncle's instructions. After numerous divinations and astrological calculations, Nakso Lotsawa was chosen to go to India and invite Tibet. Go to India and invite Atisha to Tibet. Nakso was summoned from Gungtang, where he was living quietly, and Lama Jangchub welcomed him with great respect, the nephew, with great respect by inviting him to sit on his throne. He made offerings to him and praised his knowledge, immaculate conduct, and kindness. Then he proceeded to tell Nakso the whole story. Although Nakso already knew everything, Jangchub with great emotion vividly evoked his last meeting with Lama Yeshe. As he spoke, Jangchub broke down and wept so copiously that his lap and the table in front of him were soon wet with tears. Seeing him so grief-stricken, Nakso could hardly bear to look at him. And though he had absolutely no wish to make the dangerous and arduous journey to India, he found himself agreeing to Jangchub's request. I don't remember what Homer's Odyssey is about, but this sounds like a bit of an odyssey. He set out with 6 companions and much gold. They encountered many hardships on the way, but eventually reached Vikramashila one night after the monastery gates were shut. Gyaltsongru Sengye and the others who had traveled with him in the early attempt to invite Atisha were still living together in Vikramashila. It so happened that Gyaltsongru was sitting on a roof near the entrance at which the travelers had arrived and overheard them talking. Much to their amazement, he called to them in Tibetan, saying they would meet in the morning and recommended that they should entrust their belongings to the gatekeeper and rest peacefully for the night. Next morning, a boy dressed in Tibetan clothing approached them. Speaking in a nomad dialect which the travelers were delighted to hear, he warned them not to reveal their true purpose. He was, in fact, a manifestation of Dromton Gyalwe Jungne, so Dromtomba, who, in Tibet became Lama Atisha's attendant and interpreter. So he was, and he's said to be a manifestation of Chenrezig. So this boy was a manifestation of Dromtomba, who had appeared in various guises during their journey to issue warnings and protect them from danger. The Tibetans had been quite naive and garrulous, announcing the reason for their visit to India to those they met on the way, which had caused numerous difficulties. So there's a Tibetan saying that if you want to accomplish important work, don't tell anybody, just go about it very quietly and don't talk about it. Talking about it attracts hindrances. It's like if you have realizations, you shouldn't really tell anybody except your teacher. When they entered the monastery, they met an old man, another manifestation of Dromtomba, who told them to heed what the boy had said and to keep their mission secret. He showed them where to find Gyaltsongru Sengye, who decided they should meet one of the most important elders of the monastery with authority over Atisha and tell him that since they were unable to invite any pandits to Tibet, they wished to remain in the monastery to study. They offered this abbot, Ratnakara, some of the gold they had bought, and he agreed to their request. He mentioned Atisha's great importance to the Buddha's teachings and said that without his presence, the other pandits would be unable to defend Buddha's teachings effectively. So, he was really an important member of the monastery. After some time, they were able to meet with Atisha privately and tell him their story. Nakso wept as he spoke of the sacrifice Lama Yeshe had made. Atisha replied that he knew of the hardships the Tibetans had faced and of their sacrifices. He told them that the great Dharma kings of the past, including Yeshe had been bodhisattvas, and none but a bodhisattva could have achieved what Lacheng Gongpa Rapsel had done for the practice of Vinaya. Lacheng Gongpa Rapsel. So during Langdama, the anti-Buddhist king, during Langdama's persecution of Buddhism, 3 monks who fled from a monastery in central Tibet tried to reach Mongolia, but lost their way and ended up in Amdo, northeast Tibet. Lacheng Gongpa Rapsel was ordained as a novice monk by them and later as a fully ordained monk when the 3 were joined by 2 Chinese monks. Lacheng Gongpa Rapsel eventually ordained 10 men whose disciples were still alive when Atisha came to Tibet. He thereby made an important contribution to the revival of Buddhism in Tibet, and in particular to the revival of the code of discipline for the ordained, the Vinaya. So, Atisha said that he felt ashamed not to be able to comply more easily to their request to come to Tibet, and reminded them that he was old and had many responsibilities. At this, he showed him his big bunch of keys, but promised to do what he could. So, I think the key holder is called Changzala, like we call them managers. So, His Holiness Ling Rinpoche had a Changza, and His Holiness Trijang, Ling Rinpoche and Trijang both had Changzalas. Like, I didn't see them carrying keys, but that was, if you had the keys, it means you could unlock all the valuable stuff in the monastery. Atisha then observed his dreams and visions. In visions, Avalokiteshvara and Tara told him that it would be of great benefit to living beings and to the teachings if he went to Tibet, but that instead of living 92 years, he would live only until the age of 72, 20 years less. Despite this, Atisha decided to go and had many books sent on ahead. The Tibetans arranged to take him on a pilgrimage, and he requested leave from Ratnakara, the abbot, explaining that he intended to travel to Bodh Gaya and Nepal, and from there he wished to make a brief visit to Tibet. Ratnakara said he knew how much the Tibetans wanted this and was aware of Atisha's own wishes, but that he must return within 3 years. Thus, with the help of Gya Tsondu Senge, Natsa, Aryatara, and numerous manifestations of Domtomba, Atisha came safely to Tibet. When he reached Ngari in Western Tibet, Lalami Changchub with a great party of horsemen, rode out to welcome him. Later, Changchub delivered Yeshe poignant message and explained again their reason for inviting Atisha to Tibet. Changchub requested him to write a text which would remove the doubts and conflicts that had arisen. He asked that it should be neither too profound nor too amazing, but something that emphasized the importance of karma. He begged Atisha to write from his personal experience on the fundamental meaning of the Buddha's teaching, presenting it as a complete path which would be of general benefit and easy to practice. In The Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, the work that Atisha wrote in response to this request, he answered 7 important questions which Changchub had put to him. These 7 questions are: what is a practitioner of the great vehicle like? Can the altruistic intention, bodhicitta, arise in an ordinary person? Does one need to hold the individual liberation vow as a basis for the Bodhisattva vow. When someone holding the individual liberation vow takes the tantric vow, does the individual liberation vow become the tantric vow, or does the person then hold two vows? Do skillful means and wisdom need to be combined or not in order to complete the two great stores of merit and wisdom, of merit and insight? Which is the correct view, Chittamatra or Madhyamika? So, these are the two Mahayana schools. How does one enter the door of Mahayana secret mantra, the Vajrayana? Atisha was very pleased by Changchabur's skillful and intelligent approach, and by his altruistic concern that not just scholars, but everybody should benefit from what he wrote. In the first verse of the lamp, he calls him the good disciple, Changchubur. Okay, it's just a little more in this introduction by Geshe Sonam Rinpoche, and I think I'll go through it. Is this okay? You don't mind? Better to listen to Geshe Sonam Rinpoche than me. Domtompa Gyalwai Jungne, the founder of the Kadampa tradition and Atisha's foremost Tibetan disciple. So, our tradition, the Gelug tradition, sort of evolved from the Kadampa tradition. Domtompa said that those who seek liberation must know the three categories of the Buddha's teaching. Atisha presents their complete subject matter in the form of easily comprehensible instructions for practice by persons of three different capacities. All those who use this golden rosary of instructions can achieve temporary and ultimate well-being. But of course, that golden rosary isn't much use to animals. We who enjoy the 8 freedoms and 10 riches of a precious human rebirth are in the ideal situation to use it now. The Tibetan word, which is pronounced kadam, consists of 2 syllables. Ka refers to the Buddha's speech, and dam to instructions. Jetsong Kapa once asked Chenga Rinchen Pel, Geshe Chengawa, to explain the meaning of kadam. He answered that it meant considering the whole of the Buddha's speech, not omitting a single syllable, as instructions for practice. Jetsong Kapa was pleased by this answer and later mentioned that he had found it most illuminating. As Buddhists, we accept that all of the Buddha's statements, both definitive and interpretable, are valid and intended to guide us directly or indirectly towards enlightenment. A Kadampa practitioner is one who practices the paths of the 3 levels of capacity taught by Atisha, which comprise everything included in the 3 categories of teaching. Atisha's lamp contains the quintessential thought of past, present, and future Buddhas, and the hidden and explicit subject matter of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Since people's abilities, dispositions, and interests differ, Atisha, one of the great Indian masters of his time, shows how this subject matter may be practiced by those of 3 different capacities. These instructions contain all that is needed for the attainment of enlightenment. 3 great rivers of teaching converge in him, those of the 2 great trailblazers, Nagarjuna and Asanga, and that of the Bodhisattva Shantideva. From Nagarjuna came the lineage of teachings on the profound nature of reality, and from Asanga and Shantideva, the lineage on the extensive conduct of bodhisattvas. So 3 great rivers meeting in Atisha, who brought all that to Tibet. So approaching this text that we will eventually get to. Listening to or teaching a great text by a great author requires a special motivation. The Kadampa masters say that we must differentiate ourselves from the animals. Merely being a human doesn't make a difference. For if we're only concerned with food and shelter, we're no better than animals. Yongzin Kachen Yeshi Galtsen, so he was really a great master. Kachen Yeshi Galtsen, I'll just say something briefly about him. Oh, all it says here is that he was the tutor of the 8th Dalai Lama. He had a monastery called Tsechoglim, which was from Lhasa, you go across the Kichu River, and now there's a big Chinese army camp. And then up on the hill behind that, there's Yeshi Geltsen's monastery. He wrote profound commentary on Guru Puja, Lama Chöpa, Kachen Yeshi Geltsen. So tutor of the 8th Dalai Lama. He said the fact that animals mostly walk on 4 legs and humans on 2 is not enough of a difference. There has to be a real distinction in the way we think and act. Concern only for this life is as futile as a man in one of Chandrakirti's analogies who's chipping at a stone. His companions want to move on because they're in danger of being attacked by brigands. What are you doing? I'm trying to make this stone square. And then what will you do with it? I'll throw it away. I don't quite get that. I'm not sure which of Chandrakirti's analogies that is. Well, I guess that is it. Okay, so this analogy is from Chandrakirti's commentary on Aryadeva's 400 stanzas. So Aryadeva was Nagarjuna's main disciple. So they're in danger of being attacked by bandits, brigands. And do we have brigands in America? I think of highwaymen. His companions want to move on because they're in danger of being attacked by bandits. What are you doing? I'm trying to make this stone square. And then what will you do with it? I'll throw it away. We expend so much energy on the matters of this life, but when death comes, we must leave everything behind. None of that is of any use to us then. What is useful? Creating a good relationship with the spiritual teacher, hearing, thinking about, and meditating on the teachings, making offerings and heartfelt requests to the three jewels, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and making sincere prayers of aspiration. This is how we can gain insights. Even if our attainments in this life remain limited, such prayers will bear fruit in the future. To practice effectively, you must know how to do so. First, with a really good motivation, request teaching from a spiritual teacher you trust. Next, think about what you've heard until you understand it well, and then familiarize yourself with that understanding. Certain activities like making prostrations, circumambulations, and recitation of specific prayers are accepted Buddhist practices, but whether they actually are true spiritual practices entirely depends on the motivation with which they are done. If we hope to gain a long life, prosperity, or freedom from sickness by doing them, they may bring us these results, but our activity is not an authentic practice of the Buddha's teaching. Our underlying intention creates the distinction between a worldly practice and a genuine practice of the Buddha's teaching. If we are motivated by concern for future lives, any positive action we do is an authentic spiritual practice, which will also bring us happiness in this life. Without omitting anything, Atisha's lamp presents a complete summary of all the essential points of Sutra and Tantra as instructions for controlling the mind in a form that is easy to practice. The text is adorned with the advice of the great trailblazers, Nagarjuna and Asanga. Texts like Maitreya's Ornament for Clear Realization, Chandrakirti's Supplement to the Middle Way, and Vasubandhu's Treasury of Knowledge are great works, but they do not contain all the essentials of Sutra and Tantra. Though they are intended for practice and for disciplining the mind, we must turn to commentaries to discover exactly how to use them for this. The lamp indicates clearly and concisely how to practice, but studying this text just once or twice is not enough. Longdal Lama Rinpoche said that only after he had heard teaching on this and other texts in the same tradition 32 times did he feel confident about how to meditate on the stages of the path to enlightenment. We shouldn't simply be interested in hearing or reading something new. Shantideva points out at the beginning of engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds that he did not write his book for those in search of novelty or elegant style, nor for those biased in favor of their own views, but for those with an open mind and a sincere wish to practice, and so that he himself could gain greater familiarity with the subject matter. The lamp has 4 unique features. The first is its clear demonstration that there are no contradictions in the Buddha's teaching. This it does by showing that the practices of Sutra and Tantra are compatible and mutually supportive, and that all aspects of the Buddha's teachings are interrelated. When the main emphasis is on development of the wish to gain freedom from cyclic existence, the other practices of the initial and intermediate levels are complementary. For instance, when development of the altruistic intention, bodhicitta, is central, it is supported by the practice of the 6 perfections. When the focus is on cultivating special insight, development of a calmly abiding mind is a prerequisite. The Buddha's words should not simply be regarded as a useful source of quotations to substantiate other instructions for practice. The second feature of the lamp is to show that the Buddha's words themselves should be regarded as instructions for practice. So now we have this project, the 84,000. Everybody know about that? Really? So yeah, there's this big project going on to translate the Kangyur, all the Buddha's teachings, all the sutra teachings, and a lot of them have been translated already, freely available online. So if you look up, 84,000 project, I forget what the website is, but someone put it in the chat if you know what it is. But that's the project, to translate all of Buddha's teachings. I don't know if they're going to extend it to the Tengyur, the commentaries. Lama Yeshe, when we started Wisdom Publications back in mid-70s, Lama Yeshe said one of the projects that Wisdom should undertake is to translate the entire Tengyur. And in fact, I was in Delhi with Lama Yeshe in 78, and we had lunch with Bob Thurman at the Imperial Hotel. And at that lunch, Lama asked Bob Thurman if he would work with us to translate the Tengyur into English. And I can't remember if Bob agreed or thought that's too big an ask. I mean, it took 400 years to translate all the Sanskrit texts from Sanskrit into Tibetan, 400 years. And these projects have just been going a few decades now. But then later on, Bob Thurman started translating some of the texts which they published in his AIBS, American Institute for Buddhist Studies. And they published a few books. I can't remember how many, but now that I don't know. Now that Bob is nearly as old as I am, I think he's 1 month younger than me. He's given those translations to Wisdom, so Wisdom will be carrying those books and maybe future translations as well. I'm not quite sure what the plan is. Anyway, the 84,000, did someone put that into chat? There it is, the 84,000 project. Okay, 84,000.co. So you can read a lot of sutras right there. So as Geshe Solam Rinchen says, every word of the Buddha's teaching we could take that as a personal instruction. And that's the meaning of kadam, taking teachings as personal instruction. Personal instruction for practice. The third feature is that the text permits us to understand easily the true essence of the Buddha's teachings, how to develop the wish for freedom from cyclic existence, the altruistic intention, and the correct understanding of reality. So it's easy to understand the Buddha's intention. How to develop the wish for freedom from cyclic existence. So these are the three principal aspects of the path, right? Renunciation, bodhicitta, and right understanding of emptiness. And the fourth feature is that by studying, thinking about, and meditating on it, so these are developing the three wisdoms, the wisdom of hearing, wisdom of contemplation, wisdom of meditation. By studying, thinking about it, and meditating on it, we'll know what to cultivate and discard as a natural consequence. And as a natural consequence, we'll stop serious wrongdoing, particularly that of rejecting any part of the Buddha's teaching. So what we are going to do is as we go through the text, we'll look at a brief commentary by Khunu Lama Rinpoche and also His Holiness's comments on it in Illuminating the Path to Enlightenment. So I think that we link to those in the Kurukulla calendar, I think. So a lamp for the path to enlightenment. So so before we look at Khunu Lama Rinpoche's commentary, I'll just read briefly what Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, has said about Khunu Lama Rinpoche. So before we look at Khunu Lama Rinpoche's teaching, I'd like to mention some of his holy actions just to get a small idea of his practice. His life history is amazing. This is Lama Zopa talking about Khunu Lama Rinpoche. His life history is amazing, something that we can't imagine. Even just understanding a little about how he lived his life can generate incredible devotion. He was a yogi who didn't have even one single atom of attachment. Whatever action he did, speaking, eating, even just walking, was completely free from even the smell of attachment. Khunu Lama Rinpoche, Tenzin Gyaltsen, was born in 1894 in the Kinnaur region of Himachal Pradesh, northern India, which shares a border with Tibet. So Himachal Pradesh, that's the state that Dharamsala is in also. So where he was born is kind of east of that. The people there revered him and called him Khunu Rinpoche, meaning precious one from Kinnaur. When I met Rinpoche in the 1970s, he told me he was not Padampa Sangye, but his first incarnation was a disciple of Padampa Sangye. So I've talked about Padampa Sangye before. His famous teaching, this one, 100 Verses of Advice. Padampa Sangye was a contemporary of Milarepa. So I'd like to, we should maybe look at this book sometime, his 100 Verses of Advice. Amazing teaching. I don't think I still have it, but one of the very first things, you know, in the early days in Nepal, in the early 70s, there wasn't much published. There weren't many books published, and but there were these little pamphlets people were handing around, and you know, we were hungry to get our hands on anything. Explained a little bit more about the Dharma in English. You could hardly find anything, and I got handed like this, you know, 4 sheets of cyclist style something that someone had translated some of Padampa Sangye's advice to the people of Tingri. Padampa Sangye's advice to the Tingri folk. And a lot of these sayings were there. I don't think I still have that. Or maybe it's somewhere in a box downstairs somewhere. But they're really important little Dharma sayings. Anyway, so Padampa Sangye was a wandering Indian yogi and spiritual master who brought Indian Buddhist teachings to China and Tibet. He lived at the time of Milarepa and taught in the Tingri region of Tibet, that's southern Tibet, and is quoted as saying that by holding the Guru as more exalted than the Buddhas, all realizations will come. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says he transformed into a flower as he waited for Milarepa in the Tibet-Nepal region to see if Milarepa would still recognize him, which of course he did. Rinpoche also cites Milarepa becoming the flower to test Padampa Sangye. He's author of the 100 Verses of Advice, which I just held up. So that's Padampa Sangye. So there must have been some story that Khunu Lama Rinpoche was an incarnation of Padampa Sangye, but Khunu Lama Rinpoche said that he wasn't, but his first incarnation, the first incarnation of Khunu Lama lineage was a disciple of Padampa Sangye. Do everybody know Priyadashi, the Indian monk at MIT? I've seen that he's said to be an incarnation of Khunu Lama Rinpoche. I don't know if that's true or not. There's said to be two incarnations of him. One who lives in India. His mother was one of the old hippies, a Danish woman. And the other one is said to be Priyadashi. I don't know if Priyadashi's ever accepted that or claimed that, but that's what I've heard. From a very early age, Khunu Rinpoche studied the scriptures, memorizing the Diamond Cutter Sutra as a young boy. He quickly became learned in all aspects of Buddhism, including teachings in Vajrayana, something which is not common at all with Tibetan lay people. At that stage, he hadn't received many tantric teachings, but he'd received many Mahayana Sutrayana teachings, including on Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. He spent a long time in Tibet studying and teaching. This great bodhisattva was exactly like the ancient pandits of the 6 ornaments. I think Bob has some of the ornaments up there above his head. These 6 ornaments are Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Asanga, Vasubandhu, Dignaga, and Dharmakirti. So 6 ornaments and 2 supremes are the 8 I forget what the word is, crown jewels or something of India. The other 2 are Shakyaprabha and Gunuprabha, who were masters of the Vinaya. So Shakyaprabha, Gunuprabha, and then, Nagarjuna, Sangarya Deva, Dharmakirti, etc. So Khunu Lama was exactly like them, according to Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Who wrote major commentaries on sutras, the teachings of the Buddha. He even looked similar physically. In Tashilhunpo, the seat of the Panchen Lama, and in Lhasa, he studied subjects such as grammar and poetry, rather than the traditional texts. Then in Kham, in eastern Tibet, he studied the most important Buddhist scriptures, as well as Sanskrit, and after that he went to Varanasi, the sacred town on the river Ganges in India, to complete his Sanskrit studies. I heard he was an amazing Sanskrit scholar, as well as knowing other Indian languages. I think he even knew a few words of American. He certainly knew the 3 American states of California, Washington, and New York. So I think that seals his elevation to pandit level. Whatever he studied, he could remember perfectly. Anything from anywhere, any Buddhist teaching, sutra or tantra, any teachings from other traditions such as Hinduism. Nothing was forgotten in the slightest. When he was living in India, in the early years, he was exactly like a sadhu, naked except for a piece of red cloth wrapped around his middle, living the simplest possible life. Rinpoche lived among the sadhus, and they liked him very much, sometimes offering him food. Even though he lived with them in caves and on the street and looked like them, and even though he obviously had great respect for them, his practice was nothing like theirs. He had realizations, the experience of the path. He was incredibly rich inside, a great holy being. Day and night, all the time, his heart practice was bodhicitta. Even though the quality of his knowledge of Sutra and Tantra, of all the teachings, of the complete path to enlightenment, was extensive as the sky, he still practiced bodhicitta with his whole heart, renouncing the self and cherishing others. And if Rinpoche gave advice to anybody who came to see him or take blessings from him, this was the main advice. To practice bodhicitta. When Rinpoche traveled from Varanasi to Bodh Gaya, he went to the only Tibetan monastery there at the time. I think it had been there since the time when Tibet was independent. He asked for a place to stay, but because they didn't know him and he looked like a sadhu, they didn't give him a room, and so he slept outside on the cement floor. If you have been to a Gelug monastery, you will know that the standard layout is a gate leading to a garden situated in front of the actual monastery, and around the garden is a cement balcony. This is where Rinpoche slept for many days. Anyone been to the Tibetan monastery in Bodh Gaya? Anyway, it's exactly like that. Before he was given a room in Bodh Gaya by the Tibetan monastery, Khunu Lama Rinpoche often sat in the street and recited texts aloud in order to benefit the people by purifying their negative karma. He used to sit where people came to circumambulate the Mahabodhi stupa, the great stupa that marks the place where the Buddha was enlightened. Once when I was in Mongolia, I visited a traditional Mongolian doctor, somebody who uses urine as a treatment. I think your own urine. I don't think somebody else's urine. I think. While there, I noticed an old text on his desk. I was curious and asked if I could see it. The first line said that whoever heard this text would have their negative karma purified. I thought it would be very useful to borrow the text and go outside and read the text aloud for the beings there in the same way that Khunu Lama Rinpoche did. Whenever I went into the marketplace with the text and a cushion to sit on, however, it was always filled with shoes. It was a huge area, as big as a central square in a European or American city, but it was completely filled with shoes, Mongolian boots, all sort of footwear. I couldn't find one place to sit down. I then thought of doing it outside the doctor's house, but so few people passed by, somehow it didn't happen. So these are the shoes of all the people who are in the temples around the square. You know? I suspect Khunu Lama Rinpoche reciting texts aloud around the Mahabodhi temple was far more effective. I don't know if Rinpoche mentions here, but I think that text is the Sutra of Golden Light that he's talking about. Throughout his whole life, he led an ascetic life, a very pure monastic life. He wasn't a monk, never keeping possessions, no matter how much people offered him. There was no distinction in Rinpoche's mind with what was offered, whether it was garbage or gold. If he didn't give a straight back, the offering just went under his bed like it had no owner. Rinpoche always gave anybody who came to see him Guru Shakimuni Buddha's mantra to recite. So when Rinpoche lived in Bodh Gaya and went to circumambulate the stupa, he used to pick up bodhi seeds and give them as a blessing to people. So I think when we went through Khunu Lama Rinpoche's teaching in one of these classes on the foundation of all good qualities, I think we did it as Buddhism in a nutshell a few months ago. Was I in that teaching or on this teaching on Atisha's lamp that he gave us the transmission of the Guru Shakimuni Buddha's mantra? And he told us, he said, you know, I don't have anything to give you except this mantra. So then he gave us the mantra and taught us the correct pronunciation, Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaya Soha. Mune Mune, not Muni Muni. He emphasized that. When His Holiness the Dalai Lama went to Bodh Gaya, he knew Khunu Lama Rinpoche was there and asked him for teachings on Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, showing devotion, His Holiness showing devotion to him as a virtuous friend, as a guru. So His Holiness received extensive commentary on it from Khunu Lama Rinpoche. I think His Holiness Ling Rinpoche and His Holiness Trichy Rinpoche studied some poetry and Sanskrit from Khunu Lama Rinpoche. After Khunu Lama Rinpoche had given teachings to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he immediately became very well known to the Tibetans, just like turning on an electric pump causes a fountain to shoot into the air. Before, nobody had come to receive blessings from him, but afterwards people realized what a great being he was and came to him for blessings in their hundreds, forming long lines from the guest room connected to the monastery that Rinpoche had been given all the way along the street. So, you know, he had been given room in the monastery eventually. People judged by external appearances. Before, people had disregarded him, thinking he was nothing more than a useless sadhu, without checking what wisdom he had. If he had had a tall, elegant body and a long white beard, and had worn a smart long robe, they might have decided he was a learned master and a great guru, and respected him without His Holiness's endorsement. They waited days to see Rinpoche, but he rarely left his room, not even to eat his one meal a day. He didn't have a proper kitchen at all, and maybe just coming out for the toilet. I heard he only went for pee-pee once a day. There was one monk who was still unable to see him after waiting for many days. So when he saw the monk serving Rinpoche enter his room with his food, he snuck in behind the monk. He was kind of angry about being kept waiting for a long time and asked Rinpoche why he had made it hard for him. Rinpoche replied that people who got to see him probably had a relationship with him in previous lives, whereas people who weren't previous lives disciples or who didn't have a connection with him or were even angry with him, weren't able to see him easily. Although he was not a monk, and Rinpoche said in teachings to Tibetans that he lived in the 8 lay precepts, actually in practice, he kept the 253 precepts of a fully ordained monk. He lived in the precepts perfectly, like a great yogi. In a public place like a market, Rinpoche walked looking straight ahead, utterly undistracted by the confusion around him, just as Shantideva recommends in his guide. So monks are supposed to walk with their arm, you know, their left arm is kind of holding their robes like this, and their right arm is down by their side. You see Lama Zopa walking, I don't know, now he used to walk very correctly as a monk and just looking straight ahead and not swinging their arm like we do, you know. Sort of very demurely, very humbly. He studied all four traditions of Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism, Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu, and Gelug. I think this happened mainly due to the different presentations of the teachings he received from lineage lamas. The essential path is the same. The goal is the same. The different teachings all talk about the base, about samsara, about true suffering, and the true cause of suffering. His writings were very sweet, like wonderful poetry. Like the previous pandits, he was knowledgeable in the 5 great qualities or excellences, such as diagnosis, hygiene, logic, and so forth. Okay. Rinpoche was not only an expert in Buddha's teachings, but also in other religions, such as Hinduism. He could explain them all incredibly well, incredibly clearly. Usually when Rinpoche began teaching, if there was time, he would introduce those other religions to show the distortions in their views and how their path didn't lead to nirvana. Then Rinpoche would start talking about the Buddha's teaching, about the Dharma, and about the 4 traditions with their different presentations. Rinpoche had received teachings on emptiness from lamas of all 4 traditions, and although he himself was from the Nyingma tradition, he would explain emptiness according to the perspectives of all the other traditions and not just his own. In that way, he explained it completely correctly. His audience was often composed of lamas from all traditions, although mostly Gelug Geshis and incarnate lamas. Rinpoche would not only explain the teachings from one school's point of view, but would also show very clearly each school's side in his presentation, saying things like, it is this way according to this school, and that way according to that school. Because his explanations were very clear without any confusion, everybody was completely satisfied. It was incredible to be learned, not only in one school, but in all 4. His holy mind was like a vast library, like those they have in the great Tibetan monastic university libraries, with thousands and thousands of volumes. In the main Sakya monastery in Tibet, you go in and there's this huge altar, and if they let you in behind the altar, there's this space behind the altar, and there's this huge wall, really high, really wide, just packed with all the texts. I don't know what they all are, Kangyur and Tengyur, but and there's so many other Tibetan texts. It's an incredible, amazing library. I'm surprised it didn't get destroyed in the Cultural Revolution. It was said that it was sealed off from the public for many, many years. I first saw it in, I think in 91, my second trip to Tibet. Anyway, it was an amazing library. So Khunu Lama Rinpoche's mind was like that, contained all those texts. All the teachings that came from the holy mouth of Shakimuni Buddha were collected into the Kangyur, and all the commentaries on his teachings by the great Indian Tibetan pundits, not Tibetan pundits, into the Tengyur, with hundreds of volumes in each collection. Rinpoche could remember them perfectly. Even when he was quite old, his mind was still very sharp and clear. Ordinary people like us suffer terribly when we get old. Our mind becomes dull and confused, and we can no longer remember even the few things we have learned in our life, and certainly not the more subtle points of the Buddha's teachings. But Rinpoche could remember and explain each point perfectly, even when he was old. If Rinpoche's practice was like a sky at night full of bright constellations, my practice is like stars in the daytime. I requested a commentary on a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, but he didn't give it. Instead, he gave me an oral transmission alone in my room. He was so focused that when the postman banged on the door, I don't think he went to Kopan. I don't think he went to Rinpoche's room. I think this must have been in his room. When the postman knocked loudly, he was so focused that when the postman banged on his door, he didn't even look around, but just kept on with the text. The postman knocked quite loudly for a long time. When Rinpoche reached the 9th chapter on wisdom, I think I didn't have the karma to hear it because I immediately fell asleep. Lama Zopa. Before, I was not even sleepy, but as soon as Rinpoche started to give a commentary on the wisdom chapter, sleep came. That's how thick my ignorance was. It happened only at that time. I think there was a lot of negative karma to be purified, and consequently, it became an obstacle to realizing emptiness. There's no doubt that I need to do many years of purification. I remember in, I think it was 1977, Lama Zopa Rinpoche did a retreat in, I think it was up in Manali or Kino or somewhere, actually, I think maybe somewhere near where Khunu Lama Rinpoche comes from, up in the mountains there in Himachal Pradesh. And I know it was a 1 or 2 month retreat and maybe a bit longer. I don't remember his doing long retreats like that. Sometimes he did them in his room or up in Laudo, but this time he went to a different place. And after his retreat, Lama Yeshe said to Sister Max, to Mummy Max, who was the Black American nun who looked after Kopan and the Lamas for many years, he said, Mummy, now we really have a baby Buddha. Lama Yeshe said about Lama Zopa. So I don't know if what happened, whether he realized bodhicitta or emptiness or both in that retreat, or well, I'm not sure. But so if there had been an obstacle, Rinpoche's realizing emptiness, I think it had been dispelled by that point. Later, I was fortunate enough to receive a commentary of a guide to Bodhisattva's way of life from Khunu Lama Rinpoche at the Bodh Gaya Monastery, where the incarnate lamas used to give teachings. At one time, very early on, I lived there with many other incarnate lamas or geshis. I received an oral transmission of Rinpoche's own jewel lamp a couple of times, as well as Atisha's lamp for the path to enlightenment when I was in Nepal. So that's what that commentary on the lamp is, what we'll be looking at. I first received the lineage of the third Dalai Lama's Essence of Refined Gold from Rinpoche. I remember at that time, Rinpoche explained the very difficult concept of dependent arising simply by using his fingers. When he held up his middle and ring fingers, the middle finger was long and the ring finger was short. Look at your own. And but then he changed the positions of the fingers and the ring finger was then long. Thus, all things depend on other things. This was simple and marvelous, and that was Rinpoche's incredible skill at teaching. So you can realized dependent arising from these two fingers. Rinpoche's own jewel lamp, Rinpoche received the transmission of. So that's this text, a jewel lamp, verses in praise of bodhicitta. It's called, they called this vast as the heavens, deep as the sea. So in the early Kopan courses, mainly in the 70s, in the early Kopan courses, these are all online, by the way, at lamyeshi.com. I think there have been 52 Kopan courses, lamrim, 1 month lamrim courses since the first one in 1971, 50 years ago. 52. There used to be, for 3 years, there were 2 courses a year. And then there was, and since when the Lama started traveling in 74, then from 75 onwards, there was only 1 course a year, the November course. And last year, of course, it was not held. And I don't think they're doing it again this year. Anyway, of the 52 courses that have been given, eventually they'll all be online, but I think about 30 or 35 are online at the moment. So in those early ones, Rinpoche would come and teach at 9 in the morning and then at 4 in the afternoon. And he would start the day's teachings with at the 9 o'clock morning discourse with a quote from this book, from quote on bodhicitta from Khunu Lama Rinpoche, or a quote from Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. He would quote a verse and then he would give a commentary on that verse. And in that way, establish our bodhicitta motivation for the day's activities, you know, the teachings, for meditations, for discussion groups, for lunch, for whatever we were doing. We were supposed to do everything with bodhicitta. And so we've collected together all those teachings, those commentaries on different selected verses from Khunu Lama's book and from Shantideva's book, and we'll be publishing that in a couple of months from here, from the archive, a book called Nectar of Bodhicitta. So watch out for that. Free book. And so that contains these amazing teachings. And this introduction to Khunu Lama Rinpoche that I'm reading now, I think comes from that. So I've just found a couple of mistakes in this, so we have to try and correct that before we print it. Okay. So at least there's been some use to reading this. At that stage, back then, in the 70s, there were very few Dharma books translated into English, just His Holiness's Opening of the Wisdom Eye. So His Holiness' Opening of the Wisdom Eye was translated in Thailand by some Tibetans, and there was also a Thai monk called Kantipalo. He just passed away a couple of weeks ago in Australia, Kantipalo. He was an English monk. Anyway, I think I don't have time to tell his story, maybe another time. At that stage, the Opening of the Wisdom Eye, now that's published as a new translation by Don Lopez, published by Wisdom. Actually, we published it in '85. It's called Opening the Eye of New Awareness, which is literally more correct. So that was a text written, maybe one of the first texts written by His Holiness. There are few English books. So Rinpoche, Khunu Lama Rinpoche advised me to translate A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life into English. so Khunu Lama Rinpoche asked Lama Zopa Rinpoche to translate that into English. He said that teaching bodhicitta would never cause any confusion in people's minds. Unlike other subjects, it's a subject that even people with no interest in the Dharma will agree on. Somebody else translated Shantideva's book before I could start, however. Now there are 5 or 6 translations of that around, of course. Stephen Batchelor was one of the first ones in 79, and Alan Wallace, and there's one Oxford published, Skilton, and anyway, there's a bunch of different translations of Bodhicharyavatara. The last time I saw Rinpoche was in Kathmandu. It was much smaller then, much more primitive, with lots of open fields and fewer houses, and not many monasteries around Bodhnath Stupa. He offered me some fruit, taking it from under his table, and advised me that monks at Kopan Monastery should subdue their minds. There was no nunnery at that time. I'm very pleased that after that, Kopan has had many excellent teachers who've been able to help the Sangha there do just that. People like Ken Rinpoche Lama Lundup, who was a very qualified teacher and a disciple of Lama Yeshe, with incredible knowledge and incredible bodhicitta. Under his guidance, the teaching program at Kopan developed quickly, and now Kopan even has its own Geshis. So, Geshe Seram, who teaches at the supposedly 6 months at Tupta Norbuling in Santa Fe, New Mexico, he's a Kopan monk who became a Geshe. Of course, now he's in Kathmandu at the moment. Khunu Lama Rinpoche advised us always to recite the praise to Shakimuni Buddha. So that's the one we always do at the beginning of our teachings here. We did it before. This is a prayer that His Holiness the Dalai Lama does daily. This has become a tradition not only at Kopan, but in all the FPMT centers, all because of Rinpoche. After some time, Rinpoche left for the Padmasambhava site in India. It's Tsolpema, where Padmasambhava was born from a lotus in the lake. I really wanted to go there and take teachings and commentary on thought training, but I hadn't created the karma. Later, returning to the place where he was born, Rinpoche passed away. He was in meditation when he passed away and stayed in meditation for quite a few days. So that's very briefly Lama Zopa Rinpoche's biography of Khunu Lama. It's a longer one, or another one in this book. And there's a website called Treasury of Lives, I think, that has a biography of many lamas, which is quite good. If you come across the name of an Indian pandit or a lama that you haven't heard of, you might find his biography there at the Treasury of Lives. And there's another longer biography online of Khunu Lama Rinpoche. Anyway, if you Google Khunu Lama Rinpoche biography, you probably find it. It's quite a long one, and again translated from a Tibetan biography, I think. Okay, so so those are the lives of Great Atisha and the Great Khunu Lama Rinpoche, and next week we'll actually get into Atisha's text with brief commentary by Khunu Lama Rinpoche and some elaborations by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Okay, so thank you very much. Bob, you can take us out with a...
Yeah.
What?
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So just do the abbreviated dedication, Bob. So the meaning of this, Bob is muted, but we generated bodhicitta. Hang on. We generated bodhicitta at the beginning, And we create a lot of merit by talking about and thinking about the lives of Atisha and Khunu Lama Rinpoche. So we need to dedicate this merit before we destroy it by getting angry or generating wrong views. So the meaning of the dedication prayers is, may, through this merit, may our teachers live long and healthy lives. May the Dharma spread infinitely throughout all directions, and may all sentient beings quickly reach enlightenment. So, we dedicate the merit. That's the meaning of the dedicating the merit. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna work for me. I have a audio problem right now.
Okay, Bob, I'll just do it. Do we want to do long range prayers or just the dedication prayer? We can just quickly. In that snow mountain encircled land, source of every benefit and joy, may Lord Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezig remain in life till samsara's end. You uphold the subduers more away, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjuna's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior, myself, and others, your disciples. Please, please live long. Through this virtue, may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha's state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious Supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore.
That's it? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
guys,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
See you next
Thank
week.
you.
Yes. Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks.